the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.
Quiet, please.
You're watching the DIY show on avnation.tv. We have today with us Anthony Zoti.
Hello.
And Bennett Harris from Harris Educational.
Hi there.
And today we're going to be talking about the White House Maker Faire. There was a, what was that? When was that, Bennett?
It was on June 18th. Earlier this year.
How did that go for you? That had to have been a huge thing for Maker in general because of you're at the White House, you're actually with the leaders of the country.
I know, it was an amazing experience. So the first question people usually ask me is, how did you get to go?
Yeah, where'd the invite come from?
So the answer I like to give is, I'm assuming it was clerical error. But basically they decided they were going to throw a White House Maker Faire earlier in the year. I think it came about partly because of the White House Science Fair. Joey Hootie, who you may have heard of, he's the person behind Don't Be Bored, Make Something. He's got a website, Look What Joey's Making. He was at Maker Faire several years ago when I was there for the first time, and he's the one, if you've seen the video where they fire the marshmallow cannon in the White House dining room, he comes in with his project, and it's meant to be a science fair. We've got the static display, and the Secret Service told him, no, under no circumstances fire this cannon. And the president comes up, and the first thing out of his mouth, well, let's fire it up. Does it work? Let's fire it up. So that got the president's attention, and at the same time, there were some things going on in the background about manufacturing in the U.S. That they decided, this would be a really good idea to throw a White House Maker Faire. So in February, they started off with a video with Joey Hootie that said, if you want to be involved, tweet to the hashtag Nation of Makers. So I started feverishly tweeting, and then about a month later they said, well, here's an email address, and you can email to that if you want to be involved in some way. So I did. And then they said, Maker Faire producers, and I happen to be one, and also John Danforth from Raleigh is one. So I asked, can I nominate myself? They said, sure. At the same time, I found out that John had nominated me, which was amazing. Very much thank you to them and to Maker Faire in Raleigh, Maker Faire, North Carolina. And so the process went on and on. They added a little more. Then they had a form on their site you could fill out. And finally, we got an email saying that you might be involved. Stay tuned. And then they sent out an email 5 days ahead of time saying you're invited to the White House, be at this gate at 9 a.m. sharp, and here's a form to fill out for security clearance to come inside. And a little disappointed that I didn't get to exhibit, but in a way it was a lot better because I got to go around and mingle and meet people and talk to folks.
Sure, yeah.
So I was standing there waiting to go in for the president's speech. They kind of whatever time it was, 10 a.m., they said, okay, the president's going to speak. So we lined up to go into the East Room, and somebody came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, are you Bennett Harris? And I said, yeah. And he was the guy that had nominated me on their team. And so he said, well, we liked what you're doing, both with your science kits and educational outreach, but also in your community. You're working to build a maker community in Burlington, North Carolina. You've got the Alamance Makers Guild. That's this shirt building steam in Burlington, and you're also throw a Maker Faire, so you do all these things. We knew we wanted you to be here, so it was an amazing day.
What an honor.
Yeah, and I mean, just to be able to say you were at the first one too.
Well, and it's kind of neat to hear how it kind of came full circle for the show where John Danforth had nominated you, and he was one of our original hosts of the show, so it's kind of neat to have you back here and see what really a small world the maker community can be. As big as it is, and it can still feel like a small world.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Well, they say this is the year of the maker, and as of right now, I've done 6 maker fairs this year, including the Burlington Mini Maker Faire that we produce here.
Wow.
And I'm headed to World Maker Faire in New York in September, and then at Maker Faire Atlanta probably coming up later in October. So busy year.
That is terrific.
So what was the whole? Did you have a theme for this? You had to have been almost overwhelmed when the White House said, "Hey, why don't you come here and do a Maker Faire for us?"
Well, I wanted to be there because I knew that there'd be great people to meet, that would be good contacts. I knew that it would give me a certain amount of credibility in my own community. It's kind of funny, prior to the event, they announced a thing called the Mayor's Maker Challenge that came out about a month before the Maker Faire at the White House. And what it's about is a group called the Manufacturing Alliance of Communities, and they are a group that's a think tank, and they have connected manufacturing companies, the big Fortune 500 ones, together to create grants and donations and support and education to help launch maker spaces in communities. So they got about 30 mayors to sign up, and those mayors were actually at the White House. So I found out with about 3 weeks to spare on their deadline, so I called our mayor's office in Burlington, and who's this fast-talking guy talking about makers and robots in Burlington and 3D printing? What is 3D printing? They put me on the nut list, I'm sure. And so then I went to the White House, and then they put my picture in the paper, and local man goes to White House, and then I called back, and they were very interested to work more, and then very rapidly we were able to get our town involved. So I knew it was a great opportunity to get the word out there about what I'm doing with the EV Challenge, which is a high school program where kids take gasoline cars and convert them into electric vehicles. I knew it would be a good platform to raise awareness of my science kits, to go promote the Elements Makers Guild and Maker Faire in general. And ultimately, locally, what I'm working to do is to launch a maker space that'd be highly educational. And in fact, we've even got the idea we want to put cameras in our space and kind of do like a reality TV show about the things people are making, the projects they're doing, talk about how things are done, help them document it. I don't know if that'd be a YouTube thing or a PBS thing or what it would be, but to do that we have to raise funds, and what better way than to be able to say, hey, I was invited to the White House.
Absolutely. That goes back to that credibility you were talking about before.
Yeah. So thanks to their clerical error, some cool things are going to be possible, maybe.
Good things come to good people, I suppose.
Well, let's hope so. So the president did this because they really saw that the direction that things are going. It's kind of interesting because it's for the 21st century. They're kind of projecting a return to cottage industry. The day before the Maker Faire, they had a grand opening of Tech Shop in Arlington, Virginia, a new makerspace there that's a super makerspace. They took up an old grocery store, so it's an entire grocery store full of CNC machines and laser cutters and 3D printers and sewing machines and everything known to man to make something with. And they had a summit. They held a Maker Impact Summit, and it was a group of people from MIT, Carnegie Mellon. There were people there from government. There were people from Intel and GE. There were individual makerspace folks, people from Vocademy, a makerspace in California. Lots of interesting people in the room, and they presented the results of a study called the Maker Impact Study that Deloitte University Press did. And they found that Fortune 500 companies aren't going away, but because companies are automating, they're offshoring, their most expensive cost is labor, and they're reducing the number of employees per capita that they employ. At the same time, I can afford to go buy a CNC machine from ShopBot or a 3D printer, or the supply chain. It used to be if you needed a widget to put in your kit, you'd have to buy 100,000 of them at a time and have established credit and do all these things. Now you can walk up to the counter and buy one, or buy one through the internet, because they want 10 more cents to the bottom line, and the tools make it possible. And so they're saying that people want to see, what they found is people want unique items, custom items. They want to be involved in making them themselves. They want them to be made locally. They don't want the same piece of Chinese plastic stuff sold in the big box store that everybody else has. They want something unique and sustainable and local. And that's what 3D printing and the internet and maker spaces and Maker Faire, all these things are coming together all at the same time. And that's kind of the direction, and that's where people are going to be employed. They cited the rise of Etsy. You familiar with Etsy?
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
In case anybody else out there doesn't know, Etsy is like an online store, but only for handmade items. So you have to have made it yourself to have a store on there. And it went from, some guys in their bedroom with a computer to a $500 million company almost overnight. And although only a few people are doing that full time, that's their only job, the important thing is a lot of people are doing it part-time, and it's really good supplemental income.
Agreed.
And so over time, you're going to see more and more people finding ways to be creative, whether it's jewelry and handcrafted items or furniture, or whether it's, we have modular play toys now, Arduino microcontrollers and 3D printers. The kind of things that you can put together with less knowledge and less craftsmanship is amazing.
Well, Bennett, it begs a question where we're seeing sort of a kind of a craft-based, or we can reference the bazaar type, and I'm not saying bizarre, but bazaar type qualities of Etsy, and yet you're saying that we're seeing these Fortune 500 companies like GE and Intel come in. It seems like there's like they could be opposed to one another. What's drawing in the larger companies?
Well, I'll give you an example. For Intel, they've got a new platform called called Edison, and it's basically, if you've seen Arduino, it's a computer on a board, and then you've got Raspberry Pi, that's a whole PC on a board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Edison is an entire PC on a memory card.
Huh.
And so you can embed it, so the Internet of Things, whatever you've got can be smart, can be Bluetooth, can be Wi-Fi, can tweet, can interact with you from across the globe, whatever. And so they want to get into that market because they know that there's a lot of innovation coming from individuals. Another example, 2 examples from General Electric, GE, they've started a new division. One of the things they said at the summit was that they found that it took them 4 years to go from a new idea to a new product, and that during that time it wasn't so much that they were engineering and designing, it was more like the marketing people, the salespeople, and the accountants were taking the new ideas and weeding them down and down and down until the new refrigerator or the new dishwasher was really just a different case, a different paint job than the previous model. They weren't really innovating because they were, looking at the economics in a very sort of myopic way. And so they started a whole new division of their company. It's a side business that's sort of like a makerspace. And the idea is any employee of GE or anybody in the general public can go to them with an idea. Why doesn't my dishwasher do such and so? And you don't have to be an engineer or a programmer or know how to make that happen. They have a team of engineers on site and tools geared for making appliances. They'll then help you make a prototype, and then they'll produce 100 or 1,000 units, test them in test markets, and if it does well, then they'll take it to Mexico, mass produce it, make it into a new item. But in the meanwhile, you've got this room for these niche items, and so they're looking for innovation. Another thing GE has done kind of relates to the Mayor's Maker Challenge. In cities where GE has a presence and there's a makerspace, they've started to give as a perk to their employees membership to the makerspace. And the only caveat is that if the employee creates some intellectual property, GE has the first chance at that intellectual property. But they're not being horrible about it and saying we're taking your ideas. It's more that they want an opportunity to manufacture it. Back to the idea factory that they've made with the people coming into the space and creating new appliances. They don't even want the intellectual property rights. They just want the right to make it. So you could still retain your patent or your idea or your copyright. Wow. Yeah, it's a new way of thinking about things, and that in part's coming from the open source movement, the idea of keeping the designs open.
Well, and I think that's definitely a good thing. It appears that the makers and the FOSS proponents are actually having an influence for the good, and it would be interesting to see how that can actually work long term. I think that's it's sounds scary to me when I hear about the behemoths coming in and kind of co-opting what makers are doing. But depending on how it's actually plays out, it could be a very good thing for everyone involved, up to and including the consumers.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you're going to get innovative ideas faster to market because of this. You're going to give people opportunities. You're going to create jobs. And, I mean, that's one of the reasons they threw it, is they realized, how do we bring manufacturing back to the U.S.? Well, if the president said there were 25 exhibiting makers at the Maker Faire in the White House. And he said and it's interesting, he used Steve Wozniak as the example. He didn't say Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. He said Steve Wozniak took his Apple I idea to the Homebrew Computer Club, now Apple's, multi-billion-dollar industry. And he said, I don't know if anybody here today is the next Apple or Google or whatever, but they might be, or the next person out there that'll get in the future might be. And so why not create an environment where those people have opportunities versus just hoping that they'll spring to the top?
Well, we've been seeing that with Kickstarters. There's several great ideas that came out of nothing and actually came to fruition. One of the things that I've been noticing as well with the entire maker movement is not only are we coming up with new things such as even just the MakerBot, but that has evolved over the years into becoming something that was expensive but attainable, down to almost a off-the-shelf. In fact, actually, where did I see that the Lowe's is going to be carrying MakerBots?
I know Home Depot is.
Okay, Home Depot. But a product that came out of the maker movement is now becoming something that's a product.
Yeah.
Now, on top of all that, and being out there at the White House, did you have any specific projects that could not, or displays that could not be at the White House?
Well, I wasn't actually exhibiting. I was called an honored maker attendee. There were 16 of us in that category. And so we were there to observe and be part of it and be seat fillers at the speech and mingle, which was amazing. I know that they had issues with security. I mean, a typical Maker Faire has pyrotechnics and fireworks and, strange people with weird projects. And so, I mean, in fact, the president, if you watch the speech, one of the first things out of his mouth during the speech is, "What have you people done to my home?" I said, I've got a robot giraffe on the lawn. I've got 3D printers printing away in the lobby. I've got, and it was amazing. Back to the 3D printers and the innovation. When I was at the DC Mini Maker Faire, the first one of those this year, and I was exhibiting there. I met a group from Baltimore that opened a makerspace. They closed half the rec centers in town, and unfortunately, they were the rec centers on the bad side of town. But they got a grant, reopened one as a makerspace. There's a young man that works with them, and then I met him at the White House Maker Faire. He was an attendee, and I think he was probably 14 at the time. He was considering dropping out of school. School just wasn't really for him because he was more hands-on, and it was all theory. And he ended up, they got a 3D printer, and so he used it to make parts and built some RepRap 3D printers. He ended up building 4 printers for the space for them. And now he's started his own business making custom iPhone cases that he 3D prints, and he's earning money toward going to college. Wow. And then he got invited to the White House, so now he wants to go to school and get a degree in business so he can take his ideas further, create jobs, do all the business and accounting and all that side of it too. So, it's very, one word that came up a lot during the summit was agency, that the maker movement gives people agency. And I think that's kind of interesting. They talked about how it had the potential to reinvigorate small towns, because if you're in big cities, that's one thing, but if you're in small towns, if the manufacturing jobs in the area have dried up, then the town dries up. And as one business leaves, that hurts another business, and then the restaurant closes down because there's fewer people. And but if you have something unique, if people are making products like that 3D printed phone case, and of course, thanks to the internet, you can have global sales. So you're not relying on just the local people buying it either, and you're able to get, if your idea is good enough and people notice it, you're able to get a huge audience.
Absolutely. And that's another area where the internet's a great equalizer too. I mean, the maker movement and the internet are working together hand in hand.
Well, another story, I met a lady at the White House. She was a nurse, and I actually met her the day before at the summit, and she had never heard of Make Magazine or Maker Faire or what a maker was in her life. She was there because her congressman had found out about her through some connections. She's a palliative care nurse. She's worked in hospice, and she's worked in children's hospitals for 30 years, I believe. I hope she forgives me if I was if I put too many years in there. But anyway, she seems very useful to me. But she wants to open a place called Ladybug House, which will be a palliative care home for children, because she pointed out that hospice care is generally, oriented toward older people, adults and older adults, and that, while they might take care of your physical needs, there's a lot of emotional needs and needs of the family, and that kids who are terminally ill may have a year or multiple years to live where they need serious medical care, but they do have good days, good hours, good minutes. And so she had the idea on her own of opening a makerspace. She didn't use those words, but a makerspace in their facility. And the idea, she called it a legacy space. And the idea is, well, you can build an artifact to prove, hey, I was on this earth. Here's something I've made. My family can have it. My family can pass it down. And, what an amazing idea. And she was invigorated by being in the room with all the other makers. Everybody was giving her ideas. Oh, you could get a 3D printer. You could do this. You could do that. And it was just really cool to see what happens when you put these folks with this kind of mindset together in a room.
What if I push you into a corner, Bennett? What do you think has really been the driving force at the, frankly, explosive growth of the maker movement?
Well, I've given that a lot of thought, because on the one hand, it'd be easy to dismiss this as just a trend or a fad, or wow, 3D printers are neat, but big deal. I think it's, if you look at society as an organism, if you think of us all as one giant, big, living organism, I think since the 1970s or 80s, we've kind of got off the track. We've become very specialized in our jobs. We've, the 80s with greed is good, and we've applied principles of calculus and engineering mathematics toward business, where we look at purely the bottom line, purely, how do I squeeze another tenth of a penny out of this transaction? And that's not always the best thing for long-term or sustainability or your employees. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's better for short-term gains and quarterly gains, but it doesn't bode well for the health of the company or the country or the world. And so the way I put it is, it's kind of, we're born and we're wide. We're as wide as the universe. We have infinite possibilities. We can be anything, do anything. Immediately the clock starts running, and we start to narrow in because we have limitations. Some of them are real, some of them are imposed, some of them are imaginary. Then we start making choices. So where are you born? Who are your parents? Do they have much money? What schools are available to you? What opportunities are available to you? If your dad's an engineer and when you're 5 years old, he brings a 3D printer home, you're going to get exposed to 3D printing, which is going to get you exposed to math and geometry and plastics and materials. If your dad doesn't, even if that's $300, $500, $1,000, if your dad doesn't have that money or that interest, you're not going to have that exposure. You may be looking at the world's greatest figure skater right now, but since my parents didn't grow up near a frozen pond and there was not a ice skating rink, I didn't start skating when I was 2 years old. We'll never know. And, it's probably for the best. You don't want to see me in the tights, right? But we make decisions, start narrowing in, and then you go to college, and then you pick a job, and then you get married, and all these things. And suddenly you find yourself, from being as wide as the universe, you end up being this little dot. And at work, you're highly specialized. Not only are you a chemist, but you're a chemical engineer, but you do these certain reactions, and then within those you make these 3 measurements, and then you're a specialist in this one. And so you're doing the same thing over and over at work every day. And lots of people that I know that are in good-paying engineering jobs are not happy because they don't feel fulfilled. They don't see where their efforts are doing anything for the betterment of the world, or that they're leaving a legacy. You're running through the maze, you're getting your piece of cheese every day, hooray. Maybe you enjoy it, maybe you do well, but there's just something missing from the human soul from that. Well, here, let's contrast that with the maker movement. I make science kits. So I start off, I've got a kit. Somebody sees it, and they say, oh, you know what, you could improve it if you did this. to do that, you got to drill this hole this special way. Well, another guy comes up and says, hey, I've got a drill press I'll loan you. You can use it. I'll show you how to use it. Here's how you can drill the hole. You can make them until you can get bigger and better. Then someone says, oh, well, I'll tell my friends about it. And then, oh, let's go to the local makerspace and let's meet some other people that are like-minded. And, oh, wow, I get some more ideas from them. And let's do a maker fair. And then let's do another, let's go to World Maker Faire. And suddenly, instead of being the dot, you've now expanded back out. And there's just something about human nature that we want to get our hands dirty. We want to know how things work. I mean, I could show you some weird item, and you wouldn't know what it was, but you would want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would immediately start thinking, where could I use that? What could I put that with? How could I wire that differently? How could I do something? That's what innovation is taking existing things that don't go together and finding a way to smash them together. So that's my pitch on that.
Thank you. You referenced the community aspect there as well, and to take us back to the White House Maker Faire, how did you see the community addressed, or how was community thought of specifically at the White House?
Well, I think it was a combination of the mix of people that were chosen to be there. I mean, I was very aware. I was one of 16 people at my level. There were 25 exhibits there. There were 30 mayors from cities that had signed up for the Maker Challenge. Bill Nye, the science guy, was there. I got to meet him.
Oh, cool.
I didn't get to meet him, but Will I Am was there with his Cube 3D printer. Dean Kamen was there. But in the people that I was very aware. Well, I got picked. That means there's 1,000 people that signed up for the same little slot that didn't get picked. They're all amazing people with good projects too. There was definitely a focus on maker spaces and people involved in those that have community outreach.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little bit of focus toward Maker Faire and the notion of let's get it out there with these yearly festivals, whether it's a small one locally or the big one in California. The people that were there with projects, there were a lot of kids there. There were several student groups or younger inventors that were there. There was a group from Asheville, North Carolina, the Beatty family, and they make robots that are their museum quality model replicas of like the Mars rover, but they're remote controlled from your phone, and so you could have one at your local museum. And their motto was, "Why start a paper route when you can start a robotics company?" And it's a young girl, like I don't remember their ages, probably 8 and 13, 8 and 15, somewhere in there. And then their dad and mom help them out, but they do it on their own. And the notion that if you look at past things, the Great Exhibition and World's Fair, Science Fair, it's always companies, it's always adults. And the thing about Maker Faire and Maker Spaces is, at least the way I see it, is that kids are invited, families are invited, people that just hack something together that don't know all the ins and outs are invited on top of the companies and the ideas like MakerBot that become companies. And, again, not every idea is the best, not every idea is going to go everywhere, but the fact that everybody's invited to the table is a much more open environment than sort of the competitive model of social Darwinism. Your idea is the best, so it'll rise to the top, and the other guy, well, he wasn't as good. Well, that's not the attitude.
Do you think having the whole event at the White House gives the whole maker movement more credibility?
It can't help but not, right? I mean, the fact that Maker Fairs are springing up, there were 100 2 years ago, there were 120 last year. There are, as of the White House Maker Faire, there are already 140 on the books, worldwide, but mostly in the U.S. And just the fact that the President of the United States said today is a national day of making, and gave a speech and called people out and helped enabled us with the tool of being able to say, hey, I was there, listen to me, what I have to say matters. I mean, what better validation? At the same time, I'm sure if you went down to the local shopping mall or grocery store and said, hey, did you know that June 18th was Maker Day, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. So, that's why I like to be on your show. That's why I like to go talk about this, so that more and more people will become aware and spread the idea of what's coming. I mean, the summit, their main point really was that the maker movement is the next industrial revolution. The analogy they gave was, imagine you're around in 1994 when the first handful of websites start to be published and go live. Only a handful of people in universities and big computer companies had a web browser or an internet connection or anything. But look at all of the commerce and jobs. When I started college, the internet existed, but I hadn't heard of it yet, and it was just between schools. By the time I graduated, web developer was a job that was sought after. And we're moving even faster now because not only is it the program and the website, but it's our building blocks that are digital. And so it's just amazing to think the direction it's going. And so getting the word out is important, and I think that's what he wanted to do, was let's help get the word out.
Getting the word out, I agree. There's a large number of schools that don't even have their own maker fairs, or don't even, I guess they need to embrace it a little bit more because it seems to be outside of their normal curriculum. Luckily here locally, we've got one of the largest maker spaces, the one there in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and they have a huge outreach program. What do you see as some of the challenges? I know the one specter that hides in the corner is copyright and not trademarking, but patents. I know that a lot of makers can run afoul of those. What are some ways that causes issues, or are there ways around that?
Well, that's an evolving issue because it's going to take time for the world to catch up to the reality of the way things work now versus the way the patent system was designed. And you see that with the split of the open source movement, both open source hardware and software, and Creative Commons licensing for materials and things. On the one hand, you've got the right of the inventor, and you want to protect a little guy with a cool idea from a big corporation that could implement it faster than he or she could. On the other hand, you want to value the rights of someone else that's created something, and that's an opportunity to teach kids about things. I mean, look at social media. We've given kids Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and so what are they creating in their videos? What are they creating? Everybody has a smartphone with a camera. Anybody can be a videographer now. It's not a highly specialized trade like it would have been even 5 years ago. Anybody can make a video with music and special effects even. But are they running afoul of copyright? If they put their clip of Star Wars in there, or they put the music from the latest, Lady Gaga video, is that a problem? And so we're going to have to evolve our law. It's not so much that we have to adapt to the laws. I think it's that we have to adapt the laws to the situation over time. As far as schools, a lot of schools are involved. There's a thing called the Maker Education Initiative. And the idea is project-based classes. So instead of lecturing and then maybe hands-on lab and then test, you start off by saying, okay, kids, what have you always wanted to make? Or maybe what have you wanted to make that follows the theme we're talking about? Maybe we're talking about energy, so what do you want to make related to energy? Kids come up with a project, and the teacher has to become a facilitator, teach them how to find materials, how to use tools, how to put it together, how to test it, how to evaluate it, how to publish it. But that's more valuable as an education. One of the things that came out of the summit, MIT is going to start doing what they call, what they said was, if you're a design student, you have to come in with a portfolio. You have to say, here's the things I painted and drawn and designed before you can get in. Well, engineers, they just look at their SAT scores. Well, so going forward, they want engineering students to have a maker portfolio. Show us the first robotics project you did. Show us the 3D printer you made. Show us the item you 3D printed, and build up a portfolio of items. The barriers to entry, and this was something that the people from the U.S. Department of Education that were there pointed out, STEM is a buzzword, but a lot of teachers just don't yet know exactly what to do with it. Because if you think about it, did you guys have engineering training in high school or middle school or elementary school? So it's unheard of to teach the idea of engineering. You may have had some technology in terms of vocational classes, industrial arts. You might have had hard science like physics or chemistry. You definitely did some math. But the idea behind STEM is, let's don't teach these in a vacuum. Let's let the math teacher build a bridge and the science teacher test it and do that all together in one unit. So there's a lot of barriers to getting the whole paradigm of how you teach changed, and convincing people that it's worth it, convincing administrations that it's worth it, convincing parents that it's important. We use STEM, or STEAM, adding arts in there, but we have to show some tangible results, and I think that's coming over time.
Yeah.
We're involved here in Burlington. We actually excuse me, have started working with Blessed Sacrament School, a private school, and they're going to start a maker club, so they're going to be bringing student projects to our Maker Faire. We're working with them to help them with some STEM concepts, and we're even planning to do a ping pong ball satellite launch at our Maker Faire, where every student in the school will have their own satellite that we send up on a weather balloon. So
Brilliant.
That's going to be a cool project.
I think there's a lot to be said for that, for getting younger minds and engaged and excited about it. And I think there's a lot to come from the youth of today. I would typically have said in the past that they're the makers of tomorrow, but that's wrong. They're the makers of today, and they're already getting engaged and excited. So, how do we not only do that at home? For example, I'm a father and trying to get my children active and engaged as well, but how do we get it into the schools? How do we encourage teachers? How do we make it fun for teachers so that they want to do this? Like you were talking about earlier, and you were saying we weren't given this engineering education as kids. Well, hell, our teachers didn't have engineering education, so how do they pass it on? It's an interesting dynamic now to see how adults and children are coming together, and one inspires the other and vice versa.
Well, the first thing is we all have to get over fear, because fear is the biggest obstacle. If you say, hey, I can't build this robot because I don't know how, or it's going to break, or whatever, you're never going to get started. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to build it, and if it breaks, I'm going to fix it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to learn from my mistake. One of the things they pointed out about maker psychology, and this really is just human nature, is that makers are never done with their projects. No matter what they do, they're still grinding off another corner, adding another LED. They're never happy. George Lucas is never going to stop editing Star Wars and changing things and adding things. It's just part of being a maker. And so encouraging that exploration, and see, that's why I think Dale Daugherty of Make Magazine is such a genius with what he's done with the he took something, print media that's dying in the internet age, but he coupled it with Maker Faire and with a community of people, and he made it into something that, instead of being, lots of magazines are pithy and here's a blurb and follow the link if you want to know more. And you can get plans to build things. But he understood that it had to be playful, it had to be fun, you had to have spectacle, you had to have a reason to get somebody into the door. And the thing that I tell everybody, there's been a new makerspace that opened in Greensboro, North Carolina, called The Forge, 20 minutes down the road from me. What I told them, my advice is that if you want this thing to grow, you have to target the non-self-identified makers. The people that already have a 3D printer or know what you mean when you say the word Arduino, they're going to find you, they're going to do their own thing, they're going to band together, they're okay, they're taken care of. I want the 60-year-old grandmother who's never picked up a screwdriver in her life to see the 3D printer and think, ooh, I could make that thing I've always thought about in my head. Can you help me learn how to use it? And then once we start seeing that, that's when it'll really be mainstream, when it just becomes a thing you do. I want something, so I go make it, and if I don't know how, I figure out. When I work with kids, I always hold up my smartphone and I say, there's nothing wrong in not knowing something, but in today's world, it is a sin not to go find it out, because it's there for you. You're hooked up 24/7, and if you don't know, somebody does, and if nobody knows, then maybe that's your job to go figure it out. And that's kind of what's at the heart of all this. Is, like I say, I think it's a correction of society for the kind of way things have gone for the last 30 years.
Absolutely. One of the things that I had noticed is that just trying to, if parents are intimidated by it, then they'll be worried about their kids getting into it. My stepdaughter had no real interest in tinkering with electronics until I introduced her to Lady Ada and her videos on YouTube and Adafruit, and she just took to that like a fish to water, and she wanted me to start ordering things left and right. I want to build this bracelet. I want to build that, which is kind of a subversive way of getting her interested into embedded programming and electronics.
Oh yeah.
Because I was able to show her this is something you can do. The problem is like I was mentioning the big makerspace here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They have an open house where they'll shrink quarters with a giant capacitor through the coil. They got a robot that smashes things, and parents see this, and I honestly think that that's the wrong thing they need to be doing, because the parents are going, oh, this is all dangerous. I don't want my kids to do this. Whereas they really need to have a kids' day of, look, they can do all these cool things that are nice and safe and fluffy, and to make the parents feel a little bit better about having that. And that's something else I have noticed about a lot of the makerspaces is very few are kid-friendly.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to jump in and just disagree a little bit. I'm not going to make a big issue out of it, but I'm a father of 3, and my daughters have free reign. They want to learn how to use the chainsaw. I'm happy to get them out there. My youngest is 8. My middle daughter, who's 9, knows how to effectively use a razor blade, and I have no issues with handing her a brand new razor anytime she asks for it, because I happen to know in her case, and this is just one example, she's going to use that razor blade and 800 rolls of duct tape to make pants and wallets and anything that her mind can think of. So part of it is for most parents, we do need to soften it a little bit, but also as parents, we need to be willing to let our kids get bruised, to get bumped, to learn from
fail and to make mistakes. And
yeah, like Adam Savage's shirt. Failure is always an option. How else does one learn? And if I need to take my child to the hospital, well, we'll deal with that when the time comes. But I'm certainly not going to take away the razor blade from her. I'm going to encourage her to create something with it.
Right.
Tony, I tried flying off the garage roof several times, and I turned out normal.
Yeah, and normal's just a setting on a dryer anyway, so we should just, cut loose and...
Well, the key is to teach people to be respectful, not fearful.
Uh-huh.
So if you're afraid of something, whether it's a soldering iron or a table saw, you're going to get hurt if you're afraid of it. But if you respect it and know how to be cautious, know how to be safe, I think the issue, though, because you're right, makerspaces, from my experience, there's kind of some of them are clubhouses for guys, engineering guys, that this is our boys' club. And there's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. Others have a very outgoing attitude. We encourage a wide swath of interests, and like Tech Shop is great. I don't know. It's up to the people that go there whether or not it's a community or not, because it's really more like a gym where here's every piece of equipment known to man. Come in and use them to make your project. And if the people get together and work and say, hey, what are you making? Or hey, here's a better way to do it, they become friends. They work together. If you just go in and ignore people and do your thing and leave, you're not really being part of a community. So it's all about the culture of the people involved. And so we kind of call it, with the Elements Makers Guild that I've started, because we're a makerspace without a space right now. We don't have a building yet.
Mm-hmm.
We share each other's workshops. We have meetings at various places. We bring speakers in. We do events. We throw the Maker Faire, but we don't have a space yet. But we try to encourage a culture, and the way I put it is it's the alpha geek mentality. So if you've ever been part of a group where, cosplay people can be this way sometimes, like, oh, you're a stormtrooper helmet, look, you're a millimeter off on your design, and your white is not Pantone number whatever, it's 1 digit off from that, versus, hey, wow, you made a helmet all on your own, and it looks really good, that's awesome. So it's all about the attitude of the people. The way I put it is the person that's never done anything but wants to learn is just as important as the accomplished engineer or artist. The person that does, needlepoint is just as cool as the blacksmith or the programmer. And if you present that as a value in the culture of your space, and if you say, all right, well, we're going to have kids in the space, well, okay, fine, the chainsaws and the other stuff, maybe we keep it in the back room and the kids can't go back there by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do parent or family night or whatever, we show some things. There's a fine line. It's just like getting girls into science and engineering. You have to find a way to do it that's not patronizing.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
authentic and valuable, but it's not like, okay, we're just going to throw something out there because it seems cool. And that's the other thing that I see is there's a lot of things that are cool, they're spectacle, but they're not necessarily maker related. But those things sometimes get you in the door, but you want to make sure people know there's more than just that.
Exactly. The other thing is that a lot of people will discount, and it's just a human nature. Oh, you're a kid, you don't know anything. I have gotten some of the best ideas or a fresh look from a child. My stepdaughter, a good example. I'm working on. You guys may have seen on my G Plus thread. I've been working for the past 2 years on a single-wheeled motorcycle trailer, and I've been working on the hitch, and ran into a roadblock. And I'm sitting there at the back of the bike holding it up, and she walked around the corner and said, "That's upside down." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? You don't even know what I'm talking about." And just those words, I flipped it and I went, "Oh, okay." It's a completely fresh look at it, at something. And that is one thing that kids bring that we somehow have lost when we've turned into adults, is having a fresh eyes or to look at things completely differently. And I have
Well, they
seen
say,
some
an
amazing.
expert is somebody who knows what can't be done. Right? So we have these biases that we've picked up based on our own experiences, and it's like Mark Twain said, let's be careful and not be like the old cat that jumps on a hot stove burner and gets burned. On the one hand, the cat will never jump up on a stove again, and that's good, but on a hot stove again, but she'll also never jump up on a cold stove. And so, that's the trick, is to look at it with fresh eyes and say, well, why not? Let's try this, see what happens.
We have a conditioned perspective as adults, and children are still so open to so much. And
well, I often wonder how many old ideas that have become outmoded because other technology has superseded them might not have reapplication today, like the idea of canals. You put, instead of shipping things from place to place over rail where you've got, maybe it's more efficient than trucks or planes. Well, what if you put it on a canal and had some sort of solar-powered motor and let it get there slowly through the water with zero resistance? What about having a woodworking shop that was still powered by a water wheel and had machines, instead of electric motors, run pulleys? Why won't that still work? Why wouldn't that be a good way to save some energy or do? We got to look at things a little differently. And and that's something else I see about makerspaces. There's a lot of baby boomers out there about to retire, and those folks, or who already have retired, and of course, and their parents that are still around too. And there's a lot of knowledge that they've built up, and how much of that knowledge gets lost because we don't do certain activities anymore. A previous generation, how many kids knew how to sew or had been exposed to canning food or baking or whatever it might be, that today you just take for granted. Let's go to the store and buy one versus let's do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And what happens if we lose that knowledge? And I think makerspaces and Maker Faire and this community, that's what it's kind of about, is preserving that historical knowledge too.
Do you feel that that was felt the same way when you visited the White House? Do you think it's valued the same way by our government?
I think they see the potential for returning manufacturing jobs and employing people. I think they also see that it's a great way to teach STEM education and cross the gap, because there definitely seems to be a skill gap that companies have identified in terms of we need certain skills for jobs, and not necessarily the highest paying jobs either, because instead of you being on the assembly line doing the work yourself, you're now there to monitor the robot, to clear jams, to fix problems, but you still need to know a little programming, or you need to understand how the machine works, or you need to have some math, or whatever it is. And those jobs can be fairly well paying. They're not the top of the line engineers, but they're well paying, but they can't find the people with the skills. And so, while we have I don't know that the recession's officially still going, there's still a lot of people out of work, but there's also a lot of jobs that take a long time to fill, and that just seems ridiculous that we've got people, we've got jobs. Why can't we get the training in the middle? And I think that's one of the reasons GE sees the makerspace as being something worth funding, as far as, if you work for them, you get a membership, because if you go there at night, you're going to get access to equipment, you're going to get your hands dirty, you're going to learn from somebody who knows something, and then you're going to be more valuable in your job tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So back to the White House Maker Faire. How did President Obama have a lot of interaction with everybody? I heard that someone gave him a pair of slippers.
I haven't heard the slipper story. I know we were all ushered into the East Room to wait for him to come in and give his speech. And while he gave the speech, he went around and talked to most of the makers. I don't think he talked to every single one of them, but all of the ones that were actually exhibiting. And once he finished the speech, he came in. So I didn't get to meet the president. I was several rows back. I've got a picture on my site that I found. I grabbed a still shot out of the YouTube video of the speech. At one point, the camera pans across the room, and in about 3 frames, there I am. If you so I drew a circle on the picture, and the picture's titled "There's Waldo," to prove to myself even that I was actually there. But there were folks from the president's, from the science cabinet, advisors that were going around talking to people too. There were a couple of congressmen there. The mayors were going around talking to the makers. So, it was kind of amazing. People, we were waiting, and the makers had reserved seats in front of us. They were like the first 2 rows were mayors, and the rest of the rows were makers, and then there was us. And I saw the line forming, and I learned a long time ago, you see a line, you get in it. Don't worry about what it's for. So I was close to the front of the line, so I was sitting in one of the first rows that wasn't the exhibiting makers. But as they came in, people were clearly in awe of the fact that they just got to talk to the president.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of us are just everyday people doing our thing, and just the notion of being having that honor conveyed upon you is just amazing. I loved what he said about this White House Science Fair. He said, if a team wins the Super Bowl, they get to come meet the president. Well, why shouldn't a kid who wins the science fair get to meet the president? Isn't that just as important?
Absolutely. That's a matter of the value shift that I think that we need to see, and hopefully we will continue to see in the country.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with athletes. There's nothing wrong with sports.
Right.
Much like us, they're geeks like us. They just have different OCD interests,
Sure.
But it's nice to see some recognition for someone like you, Bennett, and all those other makers who were able to go for something that in the past has kind of been poo-pooed or looked down upon.
Right.
It's a culture shift, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of amazing to think that this shift has happened. I mean, you see it in popular culture with the kind of movies that become popular. I mean, all the comic book movies and sci-fi things that are out there that were more niche things before, now they're mainstream. Mm-hmm. Just the notion of getting involved in electronics or programming, it's becoming more mainstream, and kids are tuned into this. I mean, when I see Maker Faire, I don't know how many people, we always ask at our Burlington Maker Faire, how did you find out about us? And universally, the adults say, "Oh, my kids saw the sign a month ago, and they begged me until I brought them today."
Oh, cool.
I didn't know what it was, but they knew what it was. And I'll tell you, I realized we had kind of hit critical mass. Before the White House Maker Faire, we had a steampunk ball for teens at our local library.
Wow.
And our Makers Guild was involved with it. We had a build party for costumes at our new comic book store in town, Game Over Comics. And so we helped kids learn how to make some things. Of course, I didn't know how to do it either. And I did something that I swore I would never do. I dressed up in a costume. I did the cosplay thing, which I thought I would never do in my life. I'm like, well, I'm a nerd, but I'm not that kind of nerd. Okay, there's limits here, right? So anyway, we did it, and I'm in my costume, and I went by a restaurant to grab some dinner on the way home. It was 10 o'clock at night, and I was sitting out in my car waiting for them to make it. And 2 guys come out with about 5 kids between them, and the kids all point, "Oh, look at him," because I'm in my costume. And the guy comes up, and the first thing out of his mouth was, "Are you a maker?"
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, in Burlington, North Carolina, someone's saying, "Are you a maker?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am."
Wow.
How do you know that? How do you know our word? And he said, "Well, I follow things on the internet. I've seen the Maker Faire." I said, "Well, have you been to our Burlington Maker Faire?" "No, I didn't know we had one." He knew about the one in Raleigh. They'd not been yet, but they knew about the Raleigh Fair. But so we invited him to both the Raleigh and the Burlington Maker Faire. But just the fact that exchange happened. Of course, one of the people in our Makers Guild said, "Well, in Burlington, you're lucky they didn't come beat you up in your costume."
That's amazing. I think we're on the cusp of something.
Well, it was amazing to go to the Maker Summit and see actual numbers and stories, and here's a university doing research into this. And kind of confirming the things that I've been thinking, that we've been talking about with lots of people for years. And I mean, like I say, it's easy to dismiss this as a fad or a hobby, or okay, it's a hobby, but occasionally someone makes a product out of it. I really see the future as people being more self-reliant. They're wanting to do things for themselves. They're wanting to make things, and that's going to start businesses. It's going to make even if it's just, I know how to change the oil in my car, I know how to fix something in my home. I choose to pay someone to do something for me instead of being stuck having to pay someone to do something for me. Those are all good values that will carry us a long way.
Empowering through knowledge.
Yeah.
And practical application. When it comes like the fixing stuff, my wife and I always put that in our income category. If I fix the washing machine, or if I fix the plumbing or the drywall, or you name it, I view that as income, because it's money that it didn't go out, and quite frankly, I'll take that money that would have been spent on a repair person or a handyman and spend it on new toys and new stuff to make.
Yeah. Well, and that's the way the economy is shifting. You're gonna see more sales of tools and raw materials. You may not see as many tchotchkes in the big box stores, but you may see more tools and more raw materials. I mean, I think it's amazing to look at places like Lowe's and Home Depot. They're starting to get more and more exotic items that aren't strictly, home building related. They're getting more hobby and craft materials than they've ever had. And, it was also amazing. Right after the White House Maker Faire, GM had a commercial for one of their new cars, and the commercial was aimed at makers. It said, "This is a car for makers."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, they're jumping on the bandwagon. Their marketing people saw this was a thing, and they're like, we better, I don't even know what the word means, but we better put it in a commercial. And Sears had one too. It was a little tone deaf in that they had a contest: buy a tool, send in your receipt, send in a picture of something you've made, and you can win this makercation, they called it. And you got to go out to Wyoming and camp with some rough and tumble blacksmiths and learn some skills. But the commercial just raged testosterone, and I was thinking, well, I wonder how many women are going to enter and win this contest.
Absolutely.
Making's for everybody, and it's amazing to me. Like, our blacksmith is just as interested in the needlepoint as he is in the hard stuff, and the needlepoint ladies want to know how to make nails. So,
yeah, I have a friend who has his own foundry, and he does metalworking. And when I first showed him what I was going to be purchasing, a MakerBot, he looked at it and said, "Can that print in wax?" And I was confused why he wanted to do that. And he explained to me what he wants to do is print an object and do what's called lost wax casting. They actually dip that in porcelain and fire it and burn the wax out, so then he can pour metal in there. And I did a little bit of research and found out that the regular PLA plastic that most of these printers work on will work for that same aspect. So as a maker, if you're good at one thing, you can still learn from others who are in completely different expertise.
Oh yeah.
I was really surprised with that, which started getting my gears turning, going, wait a minute, I can print durable items now. This is interesting to me.
Yeah, it's and the way I put it, some people are like, well, those machines are slow or they're harder to use, and I'm like, well, think about what a dot matrix printer was in 1978.
Yeah.
And look at a laser printer now where you can self-publish whole books out of your home for $1,000. I mean, they're coming down in price, they're getting faster, they're getting easier, they're getting better all the time. And like you say, Kickstarter and crowdfunding as a method. I'm going to be launching a Kickstarter coming up in the next couple of weeks myself to launch some new science kits, and to help our stretch goals on it is extra money to launch our makerspace in Burlington. And back to the soft side of things, I've also entered my science kits into Martha Stewart's American Made contest.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that's cool.
So if you go to her site and look up Harris Educational and vote for me, maybe I can get one of the 10 spots and use that money to launch my makerspace too.
Well, you know, that brings up that's a good segue. Can you kind of give those who are listening a chance to find you online, or where would you like to be followed? What would you like to share with us before we wrapped up?
Sure. Well, Facebook. I'm on Facebook. If you look for Harris Educational, all one word. I've got a pretty active fan page. I've got some interesting fans. Steve Wozniak is a fan of my page.
Woo!
Got to meet him last year. That was amazing. I've also got a page for the Alamance Makers Guild, so that's Alamance, A-L-A-M-A-N-C-E. That's the name of our county here, Alamance Makers Guild, all one word. And then my website is harris-educational.com, but don't look there. I need to clean it up and make it 21st century. But and then I'm on Twitter as Reinventor32 and on YouTube as Reinventor32. And I'm actually blogging for Make Magazine now, so if you look up on their author page, just Ben Harris, I've got several posts on there already, and we'll be doing more about regional and local makers. I see myself as sort of a correspondent for North Carolina and the Southeast, and anything else that I do. I covered Ladybug House that I mentioned earlier. And if anybody has interesting stories or their own maker story that they're having trouble sharing with the world, contact me, find me, and I'll help tell your story.
Thank you very much for being with us. This has been an awesome discussion. I really wish that I could have been a part of, or even would have watched the live broadcast of the White House whole event, because that sounded like it was very interesting.
Well, some of the stuff is online on YouTube. If you look, his speech is there, and I've got a photo album on my Facebook page. So.
Oh, awesome. We'll point everybody there.
Absolutely. Please go look, folks.
Yep. Thank you very much, Tony. Always is a pleasure.
My pleasure. I was really grateful to be here, Bennett. Very inspired. I'm hoping to have a busier weekend thanks to this. So,
Be careful with the chainsaws.
I'm pretty experienced. We heat our home with wood, so the kids have to learn how to use the chainsaws at some point.
I want to thank everybody for watching. This is avnation.tv. You can catch other great podcasts there, such as EdTech and Red Band is the new one. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.